بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم السلام عليكم. The ayah that I have for you today is 2183, but before I present my ayah, I just want to acknowledge Sheikh Ahmed Fathullah Jami, who is the author of The Call to the Believers in the Clear Qur'an, or Nida al-Mu'mineen fil Qur'an al-Mubin. So I came across, upon Sheikh Faraz Rabbani's advice, this amazing book, 900 pages, wherein this Sheikh reflects on the ayahs of God's address to the believers in the Qur'an. So in this 900-page volume, the Sheikh brings together the ayahs, commentaries, vocabulary, reflections. It's an amazing work. And we hope to summarize a little bit of that for you today. Now, the Sheikh's biography, by the way, we could do an entire video on that. Amazing story, comes from a family of ulama in Turkey. And his father and grandfathers were both ulama, and his father actually was not able to finish his studies. Why? Because his father was actually defending the Ottoman Empire and the Khilafah against Russian aggression during World War I. So the Sheikh was very much shaped by those experiences. And in this book, he really reminds us that when Allah Ta'ala reveals these ayahs of address to the believers, there are really kind of three purposes. One, that Allah is commanding us to do something, to think about something. Two, Allah is prohibiting something, i.e. dissuading us from something. And then the other is that Allah Ta'ala is giving us instruction, edification, illumination. So again, the book is called Nida al-Mu'mineen fil Qur'an al-Mubin, or The Call to the Believers in the Clear Qur'an. So verse 183 of chapter 2. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. This is definitely one of my favorite verses. It's a very famous verse, makes sense to pick it for Ramadan, but it's not just a verse about fasting being made obligatory. Absolutely, that is the reason behind the revelation of this ayah. But what I really want to focus on here, I want to zoom out a bit and think about, why does God command things? Why does God require us to do things? I actually had a question one time. Someone said to me, why does God ask us to pray? Does God need our prayer? Why does God command us to fast? Is there something that God is gaining from that? And, in thinking about these questions, I really wanted to kind of frame this reflection along the lines of, when Allah Ta'ala makes something fard, when Allah Ta'ala imposes an obligation, it's not because God derives benefit from that. No, God is transcendent, beyond being affected, increased, or decreased by whatever we might do or decide not to do. That the increase or decrease is always for the person undertaking that action. And that every time we respond to God's command to do something, we are increased, whether it is in the realm of worldly blessings we can easily perceive, or very importantly, in the realm of the akhirah. So I want us to kind of think about the language, because the language is important. Allah Ta'ala says, Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, that siyam has been written for you, prescribed for you, ordained for you. So there is definitely a language of obligation there. But what I really want us to understand here is that we need to frame this in terms of, there is a reciprocal relationship here. And that reciprocity is that you, the human being, are undertaking relatively manageable actions for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He then rewards in a way that we cannot even imagine. I want to give you a quote here. One of the things that our author says is that in this ayah, kutiba alaykum as-siyam, it's like a friend almost speaking to a friend. There's a level of intimacy there, that Allah Ta'ala is only giving this obligation because Allah knows that you can rise to the occasion. And Sheikh Ahmed Fathullah Jami actually quotes Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, by the way, is Ahl al-Bayt. He's descended from both Sayyidina Ali, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhuma. And he's a teacher of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. And what Ja'far as-Sadiq actually says about this, reflecting on this ayah, that when God calls to us with an obligation, there's a sweetness in the call by which toil and trouble are eliminated from the act of worship. And I want us to think about that. There's a sweetness in the call by which toil and trouble are eliminated from the act of worship. And what that means is that when we respond to God's call with happiness, with enthusiasm, that there is a transformation that takes place in our response, by which Allah Ta'ala transforms that person responding into what? Waliyullah, or a friend of God. I'll remind you finally of this hadith that you can find in the Arba'in Nawawiyya, Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith, it's hadith number 38, where Allah Ta'ala, where the Prophet says, peace be upon him, that Allah Ta'ala said that whoever declares war on a friend of mine, or I should say, whoever shows enmity towards a friend of mine, i.e. God, declares war on that person. And then the next part of the hadith, Allah Ta'ala says in this hadith that my servant, ما تقرب إلي عبدي بشيء أحب إلي مما افترضت عليه, that my servant does not draw near to me with anything more beloved than that which I made obligatory for him. So look at the connection there. Number one, wilaya, that Allah comes to the aid of his friends, the friends of God, right? We don't show hostility to them. They're beloved to God. And the second is, how do you actually become beloved to God? Number one, through performing that which he obligates. Number two, through persisting in voluntary acts of worship. And look at the conclusion of the hadith, that this person is brought into a space of nearness to God, such that Allah Ta'ala says, I become his hearing with which he hears, his sight with which he sees, his hand with which he strikes, and his foot with which he walks. That's the space that all of us want to be in. How do we do that? By observing the obligations that Allah Ta'ala enjoins. May Allah Ta'ala accept your fast. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh.